The flowers were still fresh when Linda Voss disappeared. On the evening of September 14th, 1984, in the small town of Hargrove, Texas, population 200, a Friday had settled in the way Texas Septembers do, the heat still hanging on the air after dark, the smell of mesquite drifting across the valley, the sound of a high school football game carrying faintly from 3 blocks away. At 8:12 p.m., Linda's next-door neighbor, Earl Beaumont, had watched through his kitchen window as she carried a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums up her porch steps. She had just come home from the flower stand on Route 9, same as she did every Friday. She had waved at him through the glass. He had waved back. By 8:45 that evening, her front door was standing open and Linda Voss was gone. What happened in those 33 minutes would haunt Hargrove, Texas, for the next 47 years. And the man responsible for it, the man who took Linda from that porch, and from everyone who loved her, would spend nearly 5 decades hiding behind something almost no one in town thought to look at, a reputation. But to understand how a killer stayed hidden for so long, you first have to understand exactly who Linda Voss was. Hargrove sits in the hill country, about 60 miles east of San Antonio, and in 1984 it had the particular character of small Texas towns that older residents still talk about with a specific kind of longing. Not just nostalgia for a simpler time, but for a specific quality of life that felt, then, like it might go on forever. People left their back doors unlocked. Children rode bikes to the creek and came home when the streetlights came on. The diner on Main Street, Patsy's, had the same 6-song selection on its jukebox since 1971, and nobody had any interest in changing it. Linda Voss had lived in Hargrove all her life. She was 38 years old in the fall of 1984, a licensed practical nurse at Hill Country Regional Hospital, where she worked the evening shift in the cardiac unit, 4 days a week. Her colleagues described a woman who brought homemade kolaches to the nursing station on Monday mornings and remembered the names of every patient's children and grandchildren. She had a habit, noted by more than one person who worked alongside her, of checking on patients one extra time before she signed off at the end of a shift, just to be sure, just to be certain. At home, she was a devoted mother to her 14-year-old son, Kevin, who would later describe the particular safety of growing up in a house where dinner was always on the table, and his mother's voice carried through the hallway at night to remind him that someone was always there. She had a vegetable garden along the south fence that she tended every Saturday morning, and she kept a jar of sweet tea in the refrigerator that was never allowed to run empty. She drove a pale blue 1979 Ford pickup. She wore her brown hair pulled back for work and loose on Fridays. She loved her chrysanthemums. Her mother, Dorothy Voss, lived 2 streets away and spoke to her on the phone every single evening. That call, on the night of September 14th, 1984, never came. It was Kevin who called Dorothy. He had come home from his friend's house a little after 9 and found the front door open and his mother's chrysanthemums scattered across the porch steps, some of the stems broken, the yellow petals coming apart on the wood planks, and no sign of her anywhere in the house. He was 14 years old, and he was completely alone. Kevin Voss called Dorothy at 9:08 p.m. Dorothy called the Hargrove Police Department at 9:11. Officers were on the scene by 9:24. What they found was this: the front door open, the chrysanthemums scattered, Linda's purse hanging on the hook just inside the entryway, her keys still in it, her truck parked exactly where it always was, in the gravel strip beside the house. She had not left voluntarily. Everything she would have needed to leave was still there. At 9:47 p.m., Officer Dale Whitman radioed in a report that has since become part of the documented case file. He described the scene as indicating a possible struggle, with the front steps showing disturbance consistent with someone being taken against her will. The neighbor, Earl Beaumont, was interviewed on the porch. He confirmed the 8:12 sighting. He confirmed the wave. He confirmed that between 8:12 and 8:45 he had heard nothing unusual. No shouting, no sound of a vehicle, nothing that registered as wrong until the blue and red lights appeared on the street, which meant whoever took Linda Voss had done it quietly, in under 30 minutes, without a single witness. A search of the property and surrounding streets was launched that same night. By midnight, 20 volunteers had joined the officers. By the following morning, a Saturday, that number had grown to over 200. The empty lot behind the Beaumont property was searched. The creek bed running behind the neighborhood was walked twice. A door-to-door canvas covered every house within 6 blocks. Linda's truck was processed for fingerprints. The porch was photographed from every angle. The chrysanthemums were bagged and entered into evidence. No one found Linda, and there was one detail, small, almost overlooked in the early rush of the investigation, that the case file documents clearly, but that investigators at the time did not pursue as aggressively as they later wished they had. A partial shoe impression in the soft earth at the left side of the porch steps. Large, male. The tread pattern photographed, measured, and filed. Then set aside. It was the first clue. It would wait 47 years. The Hargrove Police Department assigned the case to Detective Ray Castillo, a 12-year veteran who had worked mostly property crimes and had never led a homicide investigation. That fact alone would become a point of institutional self-examination years later. But in September of 1984, Ray Castillo was the man standing in Linda Voss's kitchen with a legal pad. And he approached the case with what records show was genuine commitment. The first suspect to emerge was a man named Gerald Pruitt, Linda's ex-husband, who had divorced her in 1979 and relocated to Corpus Christi. Court documents confirmed that the divorce had been contentious and that Linda had filed a restraining order against Pruitt in 1981, following what her attorney described as a pattern of harassment. Castillo drove to Corpus Christi within 48 hours of the disappearance. Pruitt had an alibi. 4 co-workers who placed him at a work function on the night of September 14th, confirmed by a sign-in log, 2 photographs, and the testimony of his supervisor. He was eliminated. The second suspect was a man who had made a comment about Linda at Patsy's Diner that several people recalled as strange. He was interviewed twice. His whereabouts were verified. He was eliminated. By October 1984, 6 weeks in, Castillo had no viable suspect and no trace of Linda. Dorothy Voss, Linda's mother, was walking the creek trail every morning. She had made a handwritten list of every car she didn't recognize that had been parked on her daughter's street in the weeks before the disappearance, and she brought that list to Castillo's office 3 times. Records show that the list was received, filed, and never fully cross-referenced. This was the institutional failure that would define the case for decades. The slow, systematic setting aside of material that did not fit the leads already being pursued. Kevin Voss was living with his grandmother now. He was 14 years old. He sat in the kitchen and listened to the adults talk and understood more than anyone seemed to realize. He kept his mother's kitchen jar of sweet tea refilled because it felt like the only thing left he could do. By 1987, 3 years had passed. The case was officially listed as inactive. The house on Pinecrest Drive had been sold. Kevin and Dorothy could not keep up the payments, and a young couple moved in who had no idea what had happened there, and who were startled in their first spring to find a row of chrysanthemum bulbs coming up along the south fence from a garden they had not planted. By 1992, 8 years had gone by. Kevin Voss had left Hargrove for San Antonio, where he was working in logistics and trying to build a life at a careful distance from everything associated with that September. Dorothy Voss was still in Hargrove. She had the phone number of the Hargrove Police Department memorized. She called every 6 months without fail. The calls got shorter as the years went on, not because Dorothy lost hope, but because there was less and less new information to discuss. What she never stopped doing was talking about Linda, to the women at her church, to her neighbors, to anyone who would sit still long enough to hear it. By 1997, 13 years had passed. Ray Castillo had retired. He kept the case file, a copy he had made for himself, in a cardboard box in his garage in Kerrville. He had carried that box through 2 moves. His wife knew not to ask about it. By 2002, the reward poster that the local church had printed in 1984, $30 to make, a $1,000 reward, Linda's photograph in the center, had faded in the window of Patsy's Diner to almost nothing. The paper had gone yellow, the ink had gone pale, but nobody took it down. Nobody in Hargrove had the heart to take it down. Every case on this channel represents months of research, verifying facts, cross-referencing documents, and giving real lives the attention they deserved while they waited. If you want us to keep doing that, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now let's get back to Linda. By 2015, 31 years had gone by. Dorothy Voss was 84 years old and still living in Hargrove, in the same house 2 streets from where Linda's porch light had once stayed on. Kevin was 45, with 2 daughters of his own. He had never stopped thinking about his mother. He had, in the way of children who survive impossible things, learned to carry the weight of it without being crushed. But there were still Septembers that cost him more than other months. Then, in the spring of 2023, something happened that no one in Hargrove had anticipated. The cold case was reopened, and this time, the shoe impression came back to life. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2023 when investigator Marisol Reyna of the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit pulled the Voss file from the archive at the Hargrove Police Department. She had been assigned a caseload of 14 dormant investigations across the Hill Country region. The Voss file was 3rd on her list. She sat in a small conference room with 2 banker's boxes and a cup of coffee and began to read. What caught her attention first was the shoe impression. The original case file contained 3 photographs of the impression taken in September 1984. Reyna sent those photographs, along with the original plaster cast, still preserved in evidence storage, to a forensic footwear analyst at the Texas Department of Public Safety. The analyst worked with the cast for 2 weeks. What he confirmed in a written report dated April 11th, 2023 changed everything. The impression matched a specific boot sole, a Nocona work boot, style 703, manufactured in Texas and sold exclusively at 2 retailers in a 4-county region between 1981 and 1986. The tread pattern was distinctive enough to narrow the manufacturing run significantly. And more than that, The impression showed a wear pattern consistent with a person who favored their right leg. A slight drag in the heel, not a limp, just the kind of unconscious weight distribution that people develop over years and never notice in themselves. Raina cross-referenced the boot retailer records, those that had survived 4 decades, with Dorothy Voss's handwritten list of unrecognized cars, the list that had never been fully cross-referenced in 1984. One name appeared in both places. She stared at it for a long moment, set down her coffee, read it again. Then she drove to Hargrove. His name was Carlton Ray Spear. In 1984, he was 41 years old, a deacon at First Baptist Hargrove, a volunteer with the Blanco County Fire Department, and the owner of a small plumbing business that serviced most of the older homes in town, including, records confirmed, the house 2 doors down from Linda Voss's address on Pinecrest Drive. He had been on Dorothy's list, a silver truck parked on the street twice in the week before Linda disappeared. Dorothy had written it down, because she wrote everything down. Carlton Spear had attended Linda Voss's community vigil in October 1984. He had brought a casserole. He had expressed condolences to Dorothy personally. He had shaken Ray Castillo's hand and told him he hoped to God they found whoever did this. He had lived in Hargrove for another 11 years after Linda's disappearance, then relocated to Fredericksburg in 1995, where he remarried, continued his plumbing business, and became, by every visible measure, a pillar of a second community. He coached youth baseball. He served on his church's finance committee. His neighbors described him, when investigators came to speak with them in the spring of 2023, as a quiet, generous man, a man who was always willing to help. He was 80 years old. The DNA evidence came from the chrysanthemum stems. In 1984, the bagged flowers had been entered into evidence and placed in long-term storage. They had survived, sealed, cataloged, and transferred twice across storage facilities, because the case was never closed, only made inactive. Forensic analysts in 2023, using touch DNA technology that did not exist in 1984, recovered a partial male DNA profile from a stem where a hand had gripped and broken the flower. The process works by identifying microscopic skin cells left behind on a surface by direct contact, cells invisible to the naked eye that can now be recovered from objects held or touched decades ago. The partial profile was uploaded to the Texas DNA database, then to the National CODIS system. No direct hit, but a genealogical DNA analysis, the same method that uses public ancestry databases to trace distant relatives back to an unknown contributor, returned a family branch that investigators were able to trace through 3 generations of documented records to a single man living in Fredericksburg, Texas, Carlton Ray Spear. Investigators obtained his DNA through a discarded coffee cup. The match came back at 99.98%. On June 3, 2023, 2 Texas Rangers and 1 investigator from the Hargrove Police Department drove to Fredericksburg. Carlton Spear was sitting on his back porch when they arrived, reading a newspaper in the morning shade. He looked up when they came around the side of the house. He looked at their faces. He set the newspaper down very slowly, in the careful way of a man who already knows. They read him his rights in the backyard, where he had been reading the newspaper, and they walked him to the patrol vehicle in full view of the neighbor, who later told the Fredericksburg Standard that she had watched from her kitchen window with her hand over her mouth, unable to understand what she was seeing. The arrest shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Carlton Spear was charged with first-degree murder. At his arraignment, he did not speak. His court-appointed attorney, entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. By December 2023, facing a jury trial and the full weight of the forensic evidence, Speer entered a guilty plea to murder in the first degree. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. He was 80 years old at sentencing. He made no statement. He offered no explanation. He gave nothing back. Linda's remains were never recovered. Kevin Voss learned of the arrest the day it happened. Investigator Reyna called him at 11:17 a.m. on June 3, 2023, and told him what had happened, step by step, in the measured way of someone who has done this before and understands that the person on the other end of the call needs to hear it clearly. Kevin listened. He did not speak for a long moment after she finished. Then he said, "My grandmother always knew somebody in that town, knew something." Dorothy Voss died in January 2021, 2.5 years before the arrest. She had never stopped calling. She had never stopped believing. She had held on for 36 years and missed the answer by 29 months. Kevin had been the one to clear out her house after she passed. He had found, in a kitchen drawer, a single piece of paper, her original handwritten list of unfamiliar cars from September 1984. She had kept it all that time. She had never thrown it away. He kept it. He still has it. At Speer's sentencing, Kevin Voss read a statement to the court. He spoke about his mother's garden, about the jar of sweet tea that was never allowed to run empty, about the way she had waved Earl Beaumont from the porch steps on the last night of her life, flowers in her arms, because she was the kind of woman who always waved back. He said, she checked on her patients one extra time before every shift because she wanted to be certain they were safe. She deserved someone to do that for her. The case led directly to a review of the Hargrove Police Department's cold case evidence storage procedures, resulting in a formal preservation policy for biological evidence that is now required across Blanco County. It is estimated that the updated protocols now protect the evidentiary integrity of 11 other inactive cases currently under review. Whether any of those cases produce similar results remains to be seen. But the possibility now exists in a way it did not before. Linda Voss was 38 years old. She had a pale blue truck and a Friday evening ritual, and a son she loved, and a mother who never gave up, and a garden that came back in the spring long after she was gone. She checked on her patients one extra time because that was who she was. She deserved, at minimum, the same. She got it. 47 years late, but she got it. What does it mean for justice when the only proof that was ever needed to name a killer spent 47 years sitting in a sealed evidence bag, waiting for the technology to catch up? How many other cases, right now, in storage rooms across this country, hold the same kind of answer, preserved by nothing more than the fact that no one had the heart to close them? And what does it say about the people who kept calling, kept knocking, kept refusing to let the world forget that they were right all along? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. Justice came for Linda Voss after 47 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists, because the truth has a way of surviving, even when everything else is gone. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. And if you want more solved cold cases, the links are waiting in the description. Thank you for being here.